So here's what I'm thinking. You saw this video and you were like, oh my God, no more politics, Rita. I can't handle this anymore. Isn't it enough? Then I'm like, how much do you, dear viewer, actually, specifically, personally, talk about politics? And not just like click and like, or read, the Skim in the morning or New York Times, but, or Reddit. But it's like, how many actually interesting and fun and engaging conversations about politics have you had recently? Obviously, there's lots of women out there who do have conversations like this, and it would be like ridiculous to imply otherwise. At the same time, I think it's a bit unwoke to pretend like men and women talk about politics in the same way and to the same extent, because I have been in so many rooms where it's just like guys quoting like the New York Times and the Atlantic and the BBC back and forth to each other as if they're saying something, and the women just kind of sitting there like, oh yeah, and like maybe saying something and then checking around for permission that nobody's gonna get mad at you for saying what you said. So, and again, there's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's not a personality flaw. Also, if you don't want to talk about politics, oh my God, don't. This video though is to try and convince you that if you personally have an interest in current affairs and politics, I think you should talk about it more. I'm going to give you 3 good reasons, and then I'm going to talk to you how. Firstly, by talking about how to deal with the not knowing what to say, and then I'm going to go through the 3, I think, main fears people have and help you counteract them. So let's get started. So why should you talk about politics given that you have an interest in current affairs and politics already? First of all, I mean, that's the obvious reason. It is interesting to talk about these things. It may not feel interesting right now if talking about politics just doesn't feel personally accessible to you, or if it just feels kind of depressing, but it's really interesting for you to explore what you're interested in, what your values are, what you think about things. I mean, just a lot of people learn a lot through conversation. That's why we bother talking with people in the first place. And there's just like a lot of things to learn about the world, about yourself, and it's fun to keep up with the times and just feel like you're participating in the zeitgeist, so to speak. But the second point, of course, is a bit more like less selfish, and it's like, well, contribute your perspective to the world. Because as I said, it's not like there's just random people in the world who are good at politic talk and people who are bad, but it tends to be like differences between groups. So there are definitely groups which are underrepresented in political discussions, and by raising your voice and contributing to discussions around you, you are really doing the whole world a service and a favor. Even if you're speaking with a bunch of people who have the same life experiences and the same political opinions as you do, they're not going to have your individual perspective, because that's literally how life works, is you're a unique individual. And actually just discussing something you really agree with people on can be extremely fruitful. I mean, that's what you do when you're a team on a project, right? You all want the project to succeed, but still talking about it moves it somewhere. And the third thing is to go back to you. Talking about politics is a great way to learn. And I said like discovering your values already, but I think specifically talking about politics often does end up having a bit more like argumentation, a bit more edge than other topics. And I think that's why women maybe sometimes want to avoid it, but I think that's also the thing that actually teaches you things, right? A conversation with your friends is very low stakes. At the end of the day, it's just something that took a few minutes and you move on and kind of forget about it. But the rewards are really high because you actually learn how to articulate yourself, how to make arguments. You learn about what arguments are good or bad. You develop self-confidence, and then you're able to bring those skills to other conversations about maybe like more high stakes topics, or you're able to express yourself. You develop confidence speaking on an issue, and then you can be an advocate. I mean, our world really needs to change, like desperately, like right now. So there's a lot of voices missing from the picture that we really need, and this could just be a pathway into something. So I hope that if you're feeling like, you read the news but you don't like talking about it, I really hope that you consider incorporating a bit more politics talk into your life. And at this point you're like, oh, okay, Rita, you're so right. Like, you're so smart. I love when you cheer me up and give me these pep talks. Thank you. I love being able to inspire you to do things. But how? Okay, so first we're going to talk about the I don't know what to say because I don't really talk about it. And then the fears. So first, I don't know what to say. So, I mean, politics is like literally like any other topic, like food and restaurants or movies, where it's like you learn what to talk about by talking about it with people. You know, when you go to a restaurant, you can discuss the ambiance, you can discuss the service, the comfort of the chairs, the quality of the food compared to the other restaurants, compare the prices, the wine pairings, talk about the other people there, right? It's like there's endless kind of things to talk about, even though the topic is the restaurant. And the same with politics. I mean, there's the people drama, there's different levels of politics, there is like different values, social movements, so much for you to, there's just so much for you to explore, and so many things that you can touch on. And just finding and discovering the topics that you feel good about, it's just the learning process, like with anything else. Like the way you learn how to talk about movies or restaurants, or, you know, like just discuss your friends, whatever. It's just all part of the learning process, and it's okay to feel like you're not really sure what to say in the beginning. Okay, so as always, I say, you know, like start small. You're not gonna go from like not really talking about politics to being like the politics expert of your friend group in one day. You know, just name a story that you really remembered reading. If you don't read the news, you know, subscribe to one of these morning newsletters that condense stories into like a few sentences, like, you know, like Vox sentences, or New York Times newsletter, or like you know, whatever like your national media is. And then just, you know, see if any one story resonates with you. You don't need to be like a news anchor who remembers everything that has happened. You could just talk about the one thing that really struck your fancy, and like, oh hey, I saw this thing in the news, did you read about that, or did you see about that? And it's like just a way to float it up casually into the conversation, bringing up your topic. And then what is there to talk about? Well, I think like one thing people often talk about is how it makes them feel, and why I like love nothing more in this world than feelings. I don't think feelings is really that good for politics, because in case you haven't noticed, we are living in a complete hellscape. So it's very rare that news will make you feel anything except like the world is trash, humanity is trash, everything is trash. And that's kind of a conversation ender. And that's also fine. I mean, I'd love to commiserate about how trash everything is sometimes, but given that's just the status quo, I also like to discuss further than that. So try to steer clear a bit of like the, oh my god, did you see that? Oh, it's so horrible. Because the conversation just kind of ends there. So instead, I think like a really safe, easy tip often is to connect whatever you want to talk about to previous future events or other contexts. So like, you know, oh, I read that, you know, the Olympics got cancelled in Japan finally. I wonder how that is going to affect the Japanese economy, because, you know, they were really prepared for that tourism. And, you know, with the Japanese economy, now that like Abe is stepping down, I wonder what's going to happen. You know, neat segue into other topics. Obviously, you don't need to like know about Japanese politics, and you can just connect it to whatever else. So anyway, that's my easy conversation starter, is anytime you want to bring up a topic, just try to connect it either to a past event, like, oh, do you think that had anything to do with it? Or a future event, like, oh, I wonder how that will affect that. Again, another tip I have always for when you're like learning to talk more is safe persons. Figure out who that one person is, who you feel comfortable, and who you don't think is gonna jump on you. You know, maybe your partner, your friends, whatever. Maybe, you know, just chatting with a friend online, because that feels like safer for you to explore topics via chat, because you have time to gather yourself. Ask yourself, you know, where would I feel safe learning this skill, and just approach it as another skill you're building. And it doesn't need to be this thing you practice every day for 15 minutes. You know, it can be, but it's also like, just let it become an organic part of your life, and you throw it in once in a while. You know, 20 years from now, think about where you're going to be compared to if you never talk about it. The other thing is, as you continue, of course, you want to discover your niche. So do you really like talking about the drama of some specific politicians? Do you really, like everybody around me, are you extremely passionate about American politics? Do you like talking about the economy? You know, it's like over time, you will just naturally gravitate, as with, you know, food or whatever, to the things you like. And then that can be kind of like your go-to niche, and it's fun to feel like you have a comfortable topic of conversation. And then also just finally, know you can stop anytime. So if you feel like uncomfortable because you don't know what to say and you're afraid the conversation is gonna get too deep or like too serious or require too much of you, you can also just be like, oh, this is like, you can be like, oh, this has been like really interesting, but can we change the topic because I would really like to talk about X? Or just like, be like, oh yeah, no, that's interesting. Have you like, did you watch this movie last week? Like, it's just like any other conversation. You're not gonna have to write some sort of political science dissertation just because you started a little talk. And I know this also can sound a bit like I'm like babying you, but I think these are like concerns many people genuinely have, and there's nothing wrong with worrying about that. The only way really forward is to actually understand like which of these things are you worried about and then help yourself with it. Transitioning very smoothly, what are you worried about? So I'm always talking about how if you want to talk more or do more things, you need to figure out the fear and you need to come up with a good remedy, because getting over it is not a remedy. So I came up with the 3 things I think are the biggest fears for people who don't really discuss politics much. My first fear, and this is such a woman fear, is called out for the wrong facts. And yeah, so you're like worried that you're gonna start saying something, you're gonna say, oh, I read this, and then it turns out it was wrong. And as a woman, I would say many of us just are completely terrified of having the wrong fact because, lest we dare say something that was not factually correct, we should not be speaking unless we are complete experts, whereas the men are all like, oh yeah, I think I heard like on the news, bro, So I'm not saying we should all be like throwing around statements with like that we have no idea or care about, but it's also like we have the right to loosen up, and this like bullshit about how we must be experts before we speak is just like patriarchal, thought/emotion control. So fuck that. What is my remedy? So first of all, it is just like realize you have this fear. Everybody has this fear. Nobody wants to be called out for being wrong. It's not shameful to be afraid of that. The one thing is to work on is your mindset shift, right? It's not a problem to get a fact wrong. As I said, you're not doing a dissertation on Japanese contemporary politics. You don't have a moral obligation to know everything, and it would be ridiculous for you to be asked to have every detail memorized on any topic. So like working through maybe previous experiences you've had where people have been really rude to you and realizing that person was crazy is really helpful, because you're like, wow, I hope this doesn't happen again, but that was like totally unreasonable by them. The other thing is, thinking about, well, like what really happens if I have my facts wrong? It's just oftentimes can be a great opportunity to shift your reality. If you really believe that, for example, like, oh, men and women have the same level of depression, and then somebody's like, oh no, like actually women, I don't know, women have a lot more depression. You're like, oh, okay, I read something else somewhere, but that's interesting. And then it can be a great learning opportunity. Not everything is about being right. And then the other thing is, also it can be like fun to stand up for yourself. If somebody calls you out for a fact being wrong, and you're like, okay, but I think that was right. And they're like, okay, but where'd you read that? It could be fun to just like, get to practice low stakes standing up for yourself and be like, I don't know, like the library, the internet, because sometimes like I've been with people and they're really like, okay, but like where did you read that? And I'm like, online. And they're like, where? And I'm just like the FBI, like, just you have the right again to like have read something somewhere, misremember it, and try to remember it. And this does not undermine your credibility as a human being. Nobody has a 0% error rate, and that cannot possibly be expected of you. Okay, next fear. This is a really good fear, which is that we're going to have a disagreement, and that's going to lead to social tension, maybe social exclusion. Totally understandable. Again, as women, we are meant to keep the peace, keep things going steady, like make sure all voices are heard and respected, and you don't want to create animosity because you want to create a gentle environment. And I say to that, those are not mutually exclusive. I don't need to agree with people's views or respect their bad arguments in order to be a gentle, caring human being who respects others. So just, that's another like thing we need to deprogram ourselves from. You do not owe people to agree with them. You do not owe yourself to have to respect their badly made arguments. You don't have to fight with every person every time. That would be crazy. But like, people make a lot of bad arguments, and I'm just like, that's not a good argument. The thing you're saying is not supported logically by the premises you are trying to say. So obviously I don't say it like that, but it's like, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a disagreement that actually, you know, clashes between people. So first of all, how do we deal with this fear? First of all, yeah, we just like accept that it's okay to have some disagreement and some tension. In fact, tension can be really productive because new insights are possible. I know that nowadays we feel like we live in this horrible bubble where everybody's stuck in their perspective, nothing you do will change anybody's mind, but I don't know, like, I don't think that's really true. I'm not going to convince my like Trump supporter parents to like hate Trump, but like, you know, that's like on one end. I think I can definitely convince some of my reasonable friends like some things about the world that I believe, and conversely, I have like often changed my mind as a result of conversations. So it's possible. Don't give up. So tension can be productive. Secondly, you know, you can always lighten the tension by being sensitive. I mean, you can always just be like, oh, sorry, like, you know, I see this is like a sensitive issue, and you know, that's just it's not really my intention to create a big conflict. Or you can, you know, lean into it and be like, I see this is a really sensitive topic for you. I hope this conversation isn't upsetting you, but I feel like I'm learning a lot. So let's continue. So, you know, like, acknowledge the feelings in the scenario, and that really helps. And finally, don't agree to disagree. That's just like, yeah, you have your opinion and I have mine, and then it just shuts down the conversation. My go-to solution instead is just to bring things back to my values. Again, in the end, like, you do agree to disagree, but you don't just say, well, okay, we just have our separate opinions. Instead, just be like, okay, well, I just really like, my number one value is like, you know, prevention of poverty. So that's why I think like this approach is so much better. And then they're like, okay, well, my number one value is like, you know, the success of brilliant individuals in the world. And then, you know, maybe you do leave it at that because, you know, you're like, oh yeah, well, that's just a big clash that we're not gonna get into now. But it's like more respectful somehow than just saying agree to disagree, because it's not saying like, well, we just have these separate views on whatever, but it's more saying our separate views are valid because they're grounded in our own value perspective, you know? I hope that made sense. To me, it feels a lot better. And my final fear is that you're going to be seen as being insensitive. And this is a really big fear for people. And this is especially true because in our world we sensationalize, you know, people being offensive, cancelled, etc. And it depends on the context that you are in, what is seen as offensive. I mean, in some contexts it would be really offensive to say the EU, you know, they have this deal with Turkey, and you know, maybe that was not a completely bad deal. That would be seen as like really, really offensive, and you know, from some perspective that makes sense. Or saying, you know, that I don't think we should have completely open borders. I've been in groups where that would be a really offensive thing to say. So it's normal to be worried about being offensive because what offends depends on the audience, and you're not a professional news discusser, so obviously you don't have your finger perfectly on the pulse of the exact right nuance for each situation, right? Like, even if you are a genuinely sensitive, caring human being. And that's, I mean, I guess here I just also think it's a bit of a mindset shift. Just kind of, you gotta accept that in some environments, opinions that you hold will just not be really welcome, and that you can always make a graceful exit. Again, maybe appealing to your values, or just trying to de-escalate and being like, oh, you know, like, I'm really sorry you feel so strongly. Right now is not really the time I want to go into this, but I would love to have this conversation with you some other time. You don't have to be attacked for what you feel. I mean, this is a huge topic, though. Of course, I'm gonna probably make a video about this Sunday because I know it's a huge issue. I could just teach a whole class about this. So I mean, in general, I think like if you're often being called out for being offensive, it's definitely something to re-examine with what you're saying and how you're saying it. And there's the two components. Firstly is learning nuanced speaking. So making sure that you're speaking in a way that is like sensitive inclusive, yeah, more just like adding nuance rather than absolute statements. And then the second thing is learning argument integrity, so how to make arguments that are actually true. So even if people do not agree with your values, so they don't share your perspective, they can at least understand the like logical chain of why you feel that way based on what is important to you and the facts that you have access to. But that's, of course, yeah, it's not something I can really solve in like 2 minutes. So that's about it for this video. I really hope that I have encouraged you to talk a bit more about politics. If you haven't seen my video about how to talk more in general, then maybe you should check that one out. Otherwise, have a great week, and don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it.